Part 19, Chapter 10. Palmer worked painfully at the engine of the short-haul helicopter. Occasionally, he'd glance nervously over his shoulder for movement that went against the wind. Sanders and Macready were dim, distant shapes moving about the trash dump. He turned back to his work, frowned at the engine, and then the pile of parts nearby. Well, damn. Where's that magneto? Can't find a thing around here anymore. Copper, Clark, and Gary sat moodily next to one another on the large rec room couch. Norris had the doctor's bag open on the card table and was awkwardly trying to prepare 3 injections. He was new at the business, hadn't done any first aid since the army, and that was quite a long time ago. Fuchs couldn't help. The assistant biologist was busy in the lab, trying to think of a new test they could try on each other. That took priority. Not that he would have been much use. He was used to squirting things out of hypos into cultures and slides, not veins. Norris would have to manage by himself. Copper shifted his backside on the cushions and smiled pleasantly. "I'll do it if you like," he told the geophysicist. "You're liable to break the needle in my arm or miss the vein." Childs gestured towards him with the torch. "Never you mind, Doc. It'll be all right. He's doing a real fine job." He smiled encouragingly at Norris. I'm not sure," the older man began hesitantly. "You just do your best, man," the mechanic advised him. "You'll manage." He smiled thinly at the 3 men on the couch. Copper glared at him. The wind whistled around Macready, trying to pry under the warm, insulated rim of his Parker hood. The only light came from the flashlights he and Sanders carried. The faint glow of the compound's exterior lamps barely reached the trash dump. They could hear Palmer flailing energetically at the nearby helicopters. He turned over a heap of damp cardboard, kicked it aside. "Look for shoes, too," he told his companion. "And burned cloth. Any clothing that's more than just worn out." Having finally succeeded in performing the injections with a minimum of discomfort to the recipients, Norris had moved into the telecommunications room. He knew more about electronics than medicine and was glad of the opportunity to work on something that wouldn't complain if he made a mistake. He disconnected the still useless headset and rubbed at his chest. Occasionally, Childs would give him a shout and he'd answer back. He took the small plastic bottle from his shirt pocket and popped a couple of the tiny white pills. The pain in his chest went away. He went back to work on the radio. Knowles was skating through the labyrinth of corridors, checking out the individual waste bins as well as shelves, lockers, and any place else something might have hidden damaging evidence. He checked regularly with Childs or Fuchs. Macready passed him, coming in from outside. The cook gave him a bored glance. "That thing's too smart to be throwing away any more of its clothes where you can find 'em, Macready." "Just keep looking." "Yeah, what fun." "Want to trade places? I'll search in here for a while and you can go outside and freeze with the garbage." "Thanks, but I've got cooking to keep an eye on." He skated off towards the kitchen. Fuchs sat back at the lab desk, poring over an open book. Several other volumes lay open nearby, stacked like steamed clams. The soft light from the reading lamp illuminated the open pages, but not his thoughts, which were filled with confusion and worry. Macready poked his head into the lab. "How's it going, Fuchs?" "Nothing yet." He looked up from the book. "I had one thought, though. If the dogs changed because something they swallowed took control of them from the inside out, we'd better see to it that everyone prepares his own food and that we eat out of cans. Not that I don't trust Knowles, but anybody could get to a pot of stew." "Gotcha. Good idea, Fuchs. Keep at it." He nodded towards the open tomes on the desk. "I don't know how much longer these guys are going to hold together." "Right." The pilot disappeared, and Fuchs turned tiredly back to his work. The siren howled above the wind outside the compound, signaling the end of a 20-minute work period. Sanders extricated himself from the trash dump. At least it didn't smell. It was too cold for that. Palmer joined him, and they headed for the entrance together. He was carrying a large piece of engine. Sanders eyed the machinery curiously. "What's that for, man? You gonna work on that inside?" "No, just the opposite," Palmer told him. He grunted, trying to shift the heavy metal higher in his arms. "It's Macready's idea, so nobody goes for any unauthorized jaunts." "Oh." The radio operator nodded sagely. Macready was waiting for them. He held the door open as the two men staggered into the corridor flanking the main supply rooms. Childs was working nearby, selecting a new tip for the big torch. Palmer staggered over to the mechanic and dumped the heavy section of engine. "Phew! Heavy, mother. Hey, Childs, where's that magneto from the Chopper 1? Childs looked up from his searching, inspecting the new tip he'd chosen. "Ain't it out there?" He closed the storage bin and started up the corridor. Palmer yelled after him. "No, it ain't out there, wise ass. Would I be asking if it were?" A hand touched his shoulder. "Move it, Palmer, or we're going to be late," Macready reminded him. Norris arrived and dumped radio parts next to the section of engine. Macready locked the door and they all hurried after the mechanic. "I heard you and Childs talking," Macready said to Palmer. "Something missing?" "Ah, skip it. Not important." He pushed back the hood of his parka, began unsnapping the coat. "I'm starving. What's for supper?" "Whatever you feel like." Palmer frowned at him. "I don't much like the sound of that." "You probably won't think much of the taste either. It's our new dining policy. Serve yourself and save." "Save what?" "Yourself. Canned food only, until Fuchs can come up with a foolproof test for thingism. Unless you want to chance ending up like the dogs." "Oh yeah, I get it," Palmer replied. But the prospect of living off canned food instead of Knowles' hearty meals for an unknown period of time was just one more development that added to the general misery infecting the outpost. Start taking those snowmobiles apart next, okay? Macready instructed him. They turned a bend in the corridor, leaving the supply room far behind. I'm sorry, guys. Knowles skated over to the crowded stove where cans of various colours and sizes were heating. Macready's orders. That's all right, Knowles, Fuchs assured him. It's for everyone's own good. Yeah, I know that. I just hate to see everybody having to down that canned slop instead of my cooking. Childs made an elaborate display of masticating a spoonful of his own meal, then said thoughtfully, Actually, I hadn't noticed much difference. He ducked the spoon the cook heaved at him, laughing good-naturedly. Knowles still had some food to prepare. He checked the tray with more than usual care, since it was all he had to do now, other than making certain no one broke the stove or cut himself on a can opener. Besides which, he felt a little guilty about Blair. Most of them were starting to. The biologist might have gone crazy, but even though his head was in the wrong place, his heart wasn't. Meatloaf, potatoes, English pears, bread and butter. All present and accounted for. The others toyed with their cans and watched enviously as he slipped foil over the tray and then slid it into an insulated polyethylene container. Knowles donned his outside gear and skated towards the nearest exit. He paused there to remove his wheels, then opened the door and put his head into the wind. It was his second tour in Antarctica, but men who'd done 3 times that assured him you never got used to the polar winter. It was one thing to go to bed while it was still bright and sunshiny outside, in the summertime. That was easy to cope with. But he didn't like waking up to total darkness. It made you think the world had died. As he neared the toolshed, he thought he could make out a new sound over the wind. A distant pounding. Take it easy, man, he muttered towards the shed. The need to go outside had killed whatever compassion he'd been feeling for Blair. It was cold. I got your goodies. Old Knowles won't forget you, man. You don't know how good you got it. Everybody else slopping out of cans. You got your own private chef. He halted outside the door. The pounding from inside was very loud. He paused uncertainly, then put the tray down and peeked through the tiny window set in the door. Blair was making the noise all right, but with a hammer instead of his fists. The hammer was a small, light-duty model. It wasn't heavy enough to break through the thick boards the cook and Macready had installed over the windows. But Blair wasn't trying to break out. He was nailing new boards over the door from inside. And though his medical experience was somewhat more than limited, Knowles could tell by the expression on the biologist's face that he was far from cured. Hey! He shouted. What are you doing, man? Nobody's getting in here! Blair yelled hysterically. Nobody! You can tell them all that! Knowles shook his head dolefully and raised the hinged slat that had been cut in the base. He pushed the covered tray through the opening. Well, who the hell you think would want to get in there with you? Not me, man. The tray came shooting back out. It slid across the icy walkway and turned over. Polyethylene and foil split, and food came flying out, some of it staining Knowles' coat. Now why'd you go and... And I don't want any more food with sedatives in it. Blair screamed. I know what you're up to. Don't think I don't. You're all so clever. And if anyone tries to get in here, I've got rope. I'll hang myself before it gets to me. Yeah, you promise? Knowles turned and picked up the rejected tray. He started back towards the compound, grumbling under his breath.